Some people walk into your life at the wrong time, and somehow, they still feel right. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I want to see where this story finds you tonight. Crescent Moon. It started as an ordinary visit, the kind you make without thinking twice. I hadn't seen my friend in weeks, and his mother had insisted I come by. Just a casual evening, she said. Nothing special. But the moment I stepped into that house, I realized something was different. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and rain, that clean, comforting scent that clings to wooden floors after a fresh mopping. The late afternoon sun was melting into the curtains, scattering gold across the furniture. Everything felt still, almost too still, like the house was holding its breath. She appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, and for a second, I forgot how to speak. My friend's mom. I'd met her before, of course, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the light, maybe it was me. She wore a simple linen blouse, sleeves rolled up, a loose strand of hair brushing against her cheek. She looked like she'd been busy, not dressed up, not trying to impress, and somehow, that made her even more striking. Finally, she said with a small smile, he told me you dropped off the planet. Her voice carried warmth, that soft teasing lilt older women have when they know more than they're saying. It disarmed me. I smiled back, trying not to stare. Yeah, just been caught up with work. She nodded, her eyes holding mine a moment longer than politeness required. It wasn't flirtation, not yet. Just attention. Focus. Like she was quietly studying the edges of who I was. We sat in the living room while my friend finished something upstairs. She poured me a glass of iced tea, then joined me on the sofa, not close, but not far either. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the world glowed in that last stretch of sunlight that makes everything look like memory. You've grown up, she said suddenly, almost to herself. I remember when you used to come here as a kid, all restless and loud. I laughed. I guess life does that to you. Calms you down. Her smile deepened, but there was something thoughtful behind it. Sometimes calm is just another kind of noise. The quiet kind. That line stayed with me long after she said it. There was no reason for my heart to react the way it did, no reason for my voice to come out softer when I answered her. But there was something about the way she carried herself, poised, grounded, yet with this glint of mischief hiding in her calm. I remember her walking past me to adjust the window blinds, sunlight tracing her silhouette for a second. She looked back and caught me glancing, not with judgment, but with the faintest, knowing smirk. That's when she said it, half under her breath. You're trouble, aren't you? I smiled. Only if you mind? Her laugh was quiet, graceful, like she was amused by the idea of her own reaction. She didn't answer. She just smiled again, a smile that felt like the beginning of something neither of us had planned. Evening came gently, like it didn't want to disturb anyone. The house was calm now. My friend had gone upstairs, talking loudly on the phone, leaving his mom and me in the living room. The light had dimmed into something softer, more forgiving. The kind of light that hides tension in shadow and turns silence into something beautiful. She poured herself a small glass of wine, then glanced at me with a half smile. Do you drink? She asked. Sometimes, I said, shrugging. Depends on the company. She chuckled at that, a quiet, melodic sound that filled the air more than it should have. Then she poured me half a glass too, sliding it across the coffee table. Then let's say it depends on the evening, she murmured. And just like that, the air changed. We talked, not about anything serious at first. Work, travel, books. I told her I'd been reading less lately, that life had gotten too loud. She said she understood, that silence was a kind of luxury people forget to value. There was something about the way she listened, really listened, that pulled the words out of me. Her eyes didn't drift. Her body leaned slightly forward, her chin resting on her hand. She wasn't trying to impress or be impressed, she was simply there. It felt rare. Disarming. At one point, she mentioned her garden, how she loved watering the plants early in the morning before anyone else was awake. She said it gave her peace, that soft hour when the world still felt half asleep. I told her that sounded nice, that I didn't remember the last time I'd felt that kind of quiet. She gave a small, knowing smile. You're too young to sound that tired. I laughed, though her words hit deeper than I wanted to admit. Maybe it's not about age, I said. Maybe it's about how long you've been carrying something. Her expression shifted. Empathy, maybe recognition. That's a very old thing to say for someone your age. And then she looked at me, really looked. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was human. Two people seeing each other without the layers of politeness in between. The clock ticked on. The bottle grew lighter. The conversation wandered from safe to personal, and back again. At one point, she reached across the table to refill my glass, her wrist brushing against my fingers. Just a second, but it lingered. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremble of hesitation she probably didn't even mean to show. Neither of us mentioned it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was alive. It held everything we weren't saying. When my friend finally came back downstairs, I almost forgot what we were talking about. The moment had shifted the air between us, subtly, permanently. Later, as I left that night, I realized something had changed. I wasn't just thinking about her voice or her smile. I was thinking about the calm she carried, and how, for the first time in a long while, I wanted to be near it again. It was late by the time I stood to leave. The house had settled into that comfortable hush that only comes after a long evening, the kind filled with low laughter, half-finished sentences, and the quiet rhythm of understanding. My friend had gone upstairs again, calling out a goodnight that sounded more like an afterthought. His mom stayed behind, walking me toward the door with that easy, composed calm that somehow made me more nervous than any open affection ever could. The hallway light cast a soft amber glow across the walls, catching the gold in her hair. She folded her arms loosely, leaning against the frame as if she wasn't quite ready to say goodbye yet. "It's good to see someone actually talking to him," she said, her tone playful but sincere. "He doesn't open up much anymore." I nodded. "Yeah, I get that. It's not easy being his age, figuring things out." She smiled, that small, knowing smile of someone who's been through it all before. "It's not easy at any age." For a second, her voice softened. I noticed the faint weariness beneath her grace, that quiet kind of loneliness people don't speak of, the one that hides behind gentle smiles and well-kept routines. The silence between us grew heavier, though neither of us meant it to. I reached for my jacket, murmuring something about how late it was getting. She moved closer, just a little, to hand me my keys. Our fingers brushed, light as a whisper, but enough to send a small current through the space between us. Her breath caught, I heard it, subtle but real, and she looked up. That was when everything changed. The look in her eyes wasn't bold or flirtatious. It was startled, maybe curious. Like she'd felt something too, and didn't know what to do with it. I said, almost without thinking, "You have a way of making people feel seen." Her lips parted, then curved into a faint, almost teasing smile. "Is that your way of saying I talk too much?" I shook my head, smiling back. "No. It's my way of saying it's easy to forget yourself when you're around someone like you." That silence again. The kind you could almost touch. She looked down briefly, then met my gaze again, steady, thoughtful. Her voice dropped to a softer register. "You're troubled, you know that?" The way she said it wasn't a warning. It was a confession. I held her eyes for just a moment too long, then smiled quietly. "Only if you mind?" For the first time that night, her composure slipped. Her expression wavered, between restraint and something dangerously close to longing. Then she laughed, shaking her head, breaking the spell before it could settle. "Good night," she said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes said something else entirely. I stepped outside, the cool night air washing over me like a reset. And as the door clicked softly behind me, I realized my pulse hadn't slowed. Something had shifted between us, something neither of us could name, but both of us felt. I told myself staying away was the right thing to do, For a week, maybe two, I didn't visit. I kept busy, work, errands, anything to drown out the memory of her voice saying those two soft, dangerous words, your trouble. But the truth was, it wasn't distance I wanted. It was clarity. And clarity never came. It was late afternoon when I saw her again. It wasn't planned, it never is, not with the people you're trying not to think about. I was leaving a grocery store, a light rain beginning to fall, when I caught sight of her standing under the overhang, a paper bag in her arms, hair damp from the drizzle. She saw me almost instantly. That same surprised pause, half smile, half exhale. Well, she said, a faint laugh escaping her. You do remember this part of town? I laughed softly, trying not to sound as thrown as I felt. Couldn't stay away forever, I guess. She raised an eyebrow. Is that what you were trying to do? I shrugged. Something like that. The rain picked up, drumming softly against the asphalt. She adjusted her coat, holding her grocery bag closer to her chest. Without thinking, I reached to take it from her. I've got it, I said. Her hand brushed mine again, that same static as before, and for a moment neither of us let go. The air between us carried the scent of rain and something warmer. She smiled faintly, eyes searching mine like she was trying to read what I wasn't saying. You vanished, she said finally, voice quiet beneath the rain. Maybe I was being careful, I replied. Her expression softened, the faintest sadness touching her features. Maybe I didn't want you to be. Those words hung between us, suspended like the raindrops clinging to her hair. I swallowed the instinct to respond, to say what I felt, because anything I said would have crossed the line we'd both been pretending didn't exist. Instead, I said, You look good. It wasn't flirtation, not really. Just truth. She smiled at that, looking away, a small flush of color rising to her cheeks. You say that like you weren't supposed to notice. I smiled. Maybe I wasn't. For a while, we stood there, just two people under a narrow overhang, while the rain fell in soft sheets around us. There was no plan, no intent. Only quiet. And in that quiet, everything we'd been avoiding was suddenly impossible to ignore. When the rain eased, I offered to walk her to her car. She didn't refuse. As we reached it, she turned, holding the door open, her eyes lingering on mine longer than they should have. You shouldn't make a habit of bumping into me, she said, but the smile betrayed her. Then maybe you shouldn't make it so hard to forget you, I answered before I could stop myself. Her breath caught, barely audible over the drizzle. For a second, we just looked at each other, not smiling now, just aware. Then she got in, closed the door, and drove off slowly, leaving the faint scent of rain and jasmine in the air. And as I stood there, watching her tail lights fade into the mist, I knew this distance, the one I'd been clinging to, wasn't going to last much longer. It was one of those nights when the world felt smaller, quieter, like even the sky was holding its breath. The rain hadn't stopped since evening. The streets shimmered under the glow of streetlights, and every drop carried that deep, earthy scent that reminded me of the night we met eyes for too long. I told myself I was only stopping by to return something my friend had left in my car. That was the story. That was the lie. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, though not unhappy to see me. A soft cardigan hung loosely over her shoulders, her hair slightly damp from the steam of the kitchen. You're out in this weather? She said with a half-smile, stepping aside so I could come in. That's brave or foolish, I haven't decided which. I handed her the small book I'd brought as my excuse. Just wanted to drop this off before I forgot. She took it gently, fingers brushing mine, and that familiar silence returned, the kind that carried everything unspoken between us. Stay for a bit, she said after a pause. You look like you could use a warm drink. I didn't argue. We sat on her porch, just under the shelter of the overhang. The rain fell steadily, a soft rhythm against the wooden railing. The light from inside spilled across the floorboards, wrapping everything in amber. She poured tea into 2 mugs, steam curling up into the cool air. You ever notice how rain makes people honest? She asked. I smiled faintly. You think it's the rain? I think it's the quiet, she said, her gaze distant. You can't hide much when everything slows down. I watched her for a moment, the way her fingers cradled the cup, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. I've been thinking about that night, I admitted quietly. She looked at me, and I could tell she knew exactly which night I meant. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, barely above the sound of rain, she whispered, So have I. It wasn't a confession. It was something gentler, deeper, the sound of truth when it finally stops pretending. I didn't mean for it to get complicated, I said. Her smile was faint, bittersweet. You think this is complicated? I think it's beautiful, I said. And terrifying. That made her laugh softly, a breath of warmth in the cool air. You make it hard to stay indifferent. I met her eyes. You make it hard to stay away. Silence again, except this time, it wasn't heavy. It was full. Every heartbeat felt audible. She didn't move closer, and neither did I. But something in the way we looked at each other made the distance between us feel like it no longer existed. Then she said it, not as an invitation, not as surrender, but as truth. Then don't. The rain softened, the air stilled. I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, between breaths, between looks, between the quiet ache of two people realizing what they just crossed into. It was late, the kind of late when even the rain had grown tired and drifted into silence. The house was dim, lit only by a single lamp in the corner of the living room. Its glow fell softly across the room, wrapping everything in a golden hush. I didn't know why I was still there. Maybe either of us did. After that quiet moment on the porch, she had gone back inside, and I followed, naturally, wordlessly. It didn't feel wrong. It just felt inevitable. She set her cup down on the table, then folded her arms, glancing toward the window. The rain had stopped, leaving droplets clinging to the glass like tiny stars. The silence between us had changed again, not tense, not awkward, just full. You know, she said softly, not looking at me. I told myself this would never happen. I hesitated. What's this? She smiled faintly. Whatever it is that makes me forget how old you are. I didn't answer right away. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. You make it sound like a crime. She finally turned toward me, her expression unreadable. Sometimes it feels like one. That hurt, not because she meant it cruelly, but because she was right. There were lines drawn by time, by perception, by everything we didn't want to explain. And yet there we were, on opposite sides of the same quiet truth. I leaned back, the sofa creaking softly. If it helps, I said, I'm not sure I know what to do with this either. She sat beside me then, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. The warmth from her shoulder reached mine, quiet and electric. You don't have to do anything, she said. Some things don't need to be defined. Her voice had that calm, steady strength, the kind that hides emotion so deep it trembles underneath. For a long while either of us spoke. The clock ticked gently in the background, and outside the world was still. Then, without thinking, she reached out, her hand brushing mine where it rested on the sofa. Just a soft touch. Her fingers trembled once, then settled. I turned my hand over, meeting her halfway, letting my thumb trace the back of her palm. It wasn't passion, it was presence, two people acknowledging everything they tried to hide. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, glimmering in the lamplight. Sometimes, she whispered, not doing something says more than doing it. I nodded slowly. Then I hope this says enough. We stayed like that, hand in hand, hearts steady, breaths soft, as the lamp hummed faintly and the night folded around us. There was no kiss, no embrace, no confession beyond what already lived in the quiet between us. But it felt like love anyway, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't rush, doesn't take. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She just looked at me, calm, composed, a hint of sadness in her eyes, and smiled. Good night, she said. I smiled back. For now. And as I stepped into the cool air outside, I knew, sometimes, the strongest connection isn't the one that happens, but the one that almost does. Morning came gently, a soft, colorless light seeping through pale curtains. The world outside looked washed clean after the night's rain. I woke up earlier than usual, the kind of early that doesn't belong to routine but to thought. The house was quiet. My friend was still asleep upstairs. The only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock and the distant hum of a kettle warming in the kitchen. I found her there, already dressed, her hair tied up, a mug of coffee cradled between her hands. She looked calm, but her eyes carried that same delicate tiredness, like someone who'd been awake too long thinking about the wrong kind of truth. Couldn't sleep? I asked softly. She smiled faintly. You either. There was no need to say more. Everything between us had already been said, or felt, in that quiet space the night before. She poured a second cup, pushed it toward me, and leaned against the counter. The air between us felt heavier in the daylight, clearer, more honest. What had seemed tender and timeless under the glow of a lamp now stood exposed beneath the morning sun, where logic lived. I think you should head out early, she said, her voice careful but kind. I nodded. Yeah. I was thinking the same. Silence lingered, not awkward, just final. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth ground me. She watched me, her eyes softer than her words. Last night. I started, but she shook her head gently. No, she interrupted. Let's not define it. It was what it needed to be. That stopped me, and maybe saved me. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted it to be. Something real? Something possible? Maybe it didn't matter. She walked over to the window then, looking out at the quiet street, the damp pavement, the faint reflection of herself in the glass. Life has a strange sense of timing, she murmured. Sometimes, the people who feel right come at the wrong time. And that's no one's fault. Her words hung there, soft but unshakable. I didn't try to argue. I just stood beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, far enough to respect the distance she needed. When she turned to face me again, she smiled, that same gentle, almost teasing smile from the beginning, but now tempered with something deeper. You'll be fine, she said quietly. You have that kind of heart, one that feels too much, but heals anyway. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That some hearts don't heal, they just learn how to hide the ache better. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled back. As I walked out the door, she didn't follow me. She didn't have to. Her presence stayed, in the smell of coffee, the faint echo of laughter, the soft brush of memory that clung to the air. I got in my car, started the engine, and looked at the house one last time. She was standing at the window, half hidden by the curtain. We didn't wave. We didn't need to. Because sometimes, goodbyes aren't spoken, they're felt. And as I drove away, the road blurring under the morning light, I realized something simple, quiet, and true: some people never really leave. They just stay, in the spaces you don't talk about, in the moments between breaths, in the kind of silence that feels almost like peace. If you've ever met someone who changed you, even for a moment, this story was for you. Let me know where you're watching from, and whether you think love's about timing or connection.